In this demonstration, we're going to walk through some of the configuration of Nano server. Now, at the end of the last demonstration, we had completed the install and set up a new virtual machine for Nano server, and so we saw the recovery console that was used in order to do things like configure the IP address, configure firewall rules, remote management. Now, remote management is actually turned on by default. The IP address was obtained via DHCP by default, so we did go in and modify that to give it just a standard IP address, albeit that didn't necessarily have to be done. And we can use that recovery console to configure firewall rules as well, although in this demonstration I'm going to do that a little bit differently. Okay, so we're actually on our desktop experience server. This server is, just for clarification, configured now as a domain controller. So just to validate that, I went the old way of doing that. We have Active Directory, domain services, we have DNS. If we go into the tools menu, we have at least the Active Directory module for Windows PowerShell. I see why that didn't work. We don't have the actual Active Directory tools installed. Okay, so if I go get command and specify the module Active Directory, so we can see the various Active Directory commandlets that are included in that module, and it's going to be a fairly large number. The ability to create users and groups and whatnot, but what I want to just show you is that you have several get commands, okay? And so I did what I do quite frequently and added something to the command. So get AD domain. And we hit enter, and that's going to show me information about the domain. Okay, so the domain is called testlabs.com. This is the primary domain controller for that domain. Get AD domain controller would show me the list of domain controllers. This machine is DC1. And that is the domain controller for that testlabs.com domain. Okay, so the very first thing I'm going to do is use the djoin utility in order to start the process of adding the Nano server to the domain. So djoin is not a PowerShell command, it's a separate executable. Djoin /provision the domain testlabs.com, or just test labs, the machine that we want to join to the domain, which in this case is my Nano SVR1. And then we're just going to save the file and give it a name. And we're just going to use our current directory, ODJ BLOB. Okay, and actually we've got a parameter incorrect here, so let's check, because basically I was just given the help file there. Oh, and I see what I did. So let's just go back down. We'll hit our up arrow, and I just have a typo. And that typo is this colon. There is no colon required. I was mixing my commands up. Okay, so now we have the provisioning process started. It says it was successfully provisioned, and then it saved the provision data into this BLOB object. All right, so once we've done that, we need to enable PowerShell remoting. Now the thing is the Nano server is not a member of the domain currently. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually use the set item command for the WS man, and we're specifying the local host, and we're basically just adding a trusted host here. Okay, and we're going to add the IP address of that Nano system. So you need to have previously obtained that IP address so that you can utilize that IP address. It just comes up and says it's modifying the trusted host list. We can say yes or no or suspend, and then we should not get that. Looks like we're typos all around. That's okay because that shows us all that that I am human. All right, so localhost client, trusted host is the actual location, and so the error simply said the path does not exist. It's a good actually lesson for us to have. Always look at the first line of the PowerShell error messages. If you get past the first line, it can get a little bit murky, and it's a little bit difficult to figure out exactly what the problem is. But if you're looking at the first line, that should tell you explicitly what the error message is. Okay. Now I'm also going to create a variable here. $IP is equal to, and we're just going to set that equal to a particular IP address, 1.250, which is, of course, the IP address of that system. If you want to create variables in PowerShell, just use the dollar symbol, specify a name for the variable, and then use the equal sign to actually set that variable. So I added that system into my trusted host so that now I can enter PS session, use my variable that I've created, and then I'm going to specify a credential. And my credential, I'm going to use the variable again and just specify that I want to log in with the local administrative account. All right, so it'll pop up a dialog box asking me for the password for that account, and then it will attempt to make a remote session, create a remote session with that system. If it's successful, then we're going to see that. So the PowerShell prompt changes to the Nano server. Okay, so for instance, if I now type get service, it's actually going to be listing out the services on that Nano server. And I kind of know that it was those services because it's far fewer services than what I would have seen on my local system. I would have seen Active Directory, for instance, and I don't see that. Okay. On this remote system, and it's just a smaller number. So I'm now connected remotely. As we said, remote management is turned on for these systems. So first thing we want to do is enable the firewall rules for file and print sharing. So we're going to use the netsh command line utility to do this. It's not the only way to do it, but it is one way. There are PowerShell methods as well. Let me just type out the command. So it's netsh, the ADV firewall context, firewall set rule, the group is equal to file and printer sharing. Okay, put that all in quotes because it's got spaces, and we're enabling that value. Okay, and notice it updated 16 rules. We got an OK, which just means that it worked correctly. So I'm going to now exit that PS session, which takes me back to my local PowerShell prompt. Now we need to get that BLOB file over to the system, the Nano server system that we're wanting to join to the domain. Okay, so in order to do that, I'm just going to use a net use statement, and I'm going to map a drive to 192.168.1.250, my Nano server, and I'm just going to map a drive to the root of the C drive. And here again we have an error, but notice the color coding helps me out. Net is an actual executable. I believe that if I just go net.exe, actually that's not working. So let's do this. Net use, and we'll throw the whole thing in quotations. Not quotations, parentheses, and then there it completes successfully. So it looks like it was taking that and seeing that as a keyword or a commandlet, and so we needed to put the whole thing in parentheses to actually get that to work. So if I switch over to the Z drive now and I do a dir, I am seeing the root of the C drive on the Nano server. So let's go back to entering PS session. In fact, we'll just hit our up arrow a few times. And reestablish the session with that remote system. Take that back. We're going to exit that session. So from the Z drive, we need to copy our BLOB file. Okay, so I'm going to go copy, C, and the ODJ file, which was ODJ BLOB. Copy that directly to the C drive. Well, let's check this out. Okay, I just have my path incorrect there because my path was actually my user's administrators folder or administrator. There we go. Now we'll do a dir, and there's my offline domain join BLOB file. So now we can go back and establish that session. All right, so now we're back to the session. Let me just clear the screen. We are remotely connected to the Nano server. And now I want to run the djoin utility again. But in this case, it's going to be requesting an offline domain join. It's going to be loading a particular file, which is the C drive where I copied it, the ODJ BLOB file. Then we'll specify the Windows path, which is just C Windows, and then local OS. Okay, the provisioning request completed successfully. A reboot is required for those changes to be applied. And so I can use the restart computer commandlet with the force parameter. And that's not going to be restarting my local computer. That's going to be restarting the system that I'm actually connected to. Now, the old shutdown.exe command -R or /R would also work. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and exit that PS session. And notice I was trying to get that before it attempted to reconnect. Okay, so it shows me that in fact that system is actually now restarting. And there's a couple of different ways here that I could verify that the system has been added to the domain. Okay, of course now it's trying to connect, and so I'm just actually going to close PowerShell because I don't need to have it sit there and attempt to make those reconnections. Let me close it and reopen it. And now that this is reopened, I'm just going to go get AD computer, and that's going to list out the Active Directory computer accounts that are currently in my domain. And so we see that Nano Server 1 has now been added to the domain. As I said, that's just one way we could use Active Directory users of computers or the admin center. I didn't install all of those GUI tools. So we see that's there. Let's run get Windows feature. We'll specify the computer Nano Server 1. It's going to list out the features that are installed on that system. So that's another way of doing PowerShell remoting. In this case, it's just a single sort of one-off command that hits whatever server I specify in the computer name parameter and then just retrieves information from that system. So we see that there are a few roles that are installed. Web server, because we specified that we wanted to do that. File and storage services, although it has just a much smaller number of available individual role services, but it is installed as well as web server. If you recall, those were the packages that we actually added when we were preparing the image. Okay, so if I want to install an additional role, let me scroll back up here. The file and storage services role is installed, but the actual file server role is not installed. And that was, I take that back, I forgot what we did in that command. That command, we used the storage parameter, didn't we? We did not use the file server. So let's go install Windows feature, and we're going to remotely install. So we're going to have to specify the computer name again, SVR1, and then the fs-file server role. So we'll do it that way. Okay, and that will make a remote connection and install that role on that particular system. And of course, in order to verify that, you can just run get Windows feature again and specify that remote system. This is not the only way of doing this. We can use Server Manager as well to add the Nano server, just like Server Core, into a server group. And then we can use graphical utilities if we would like. I'm trying to utilize Windows PowerShell as much as possible because it's really where Microsoft seems to focus on the exams. So it's a good idea as we're preparing for certification exams that we get familiar with the PowerShell methods of connecting to these systems. So we see the installation finally starting there. It seems like it takes a while to start. Looks like we have a warning, but the warning is just in regards to updating, automatic updating. And so it says error off at the end there, but what you want to look at is the success code, or the exit code, excuse me, that it was success. So if I go get Windows feature and I specify that comp name again, I'm going to retrieve information, and we're going to see now that the file server role has actually been installed on that system. Now let's do our enter PS session here again. And I didn't create the variable, and I've shut down PowerShell. So I'm going to have to type out the full IP address. But same difference. The variable just sort of made it easier to do in that command. So once I make this connection, there are a few other things that we can take a look at. So once the connection is made, let's use the get net IP address command to identify the IP addresses that are on that system. And let me actually do address family here of IPv4. So I see my 192.168.1.250 on the Ethernet interface for that system. Get DNS server address, or get client. And actually, I'm forgetting what that command is. I'm drawing a blank on the command. No matter. It actually used the DNS server, which is the domain controller, in order to display that information. I think you can do ipconfig all if you really want to. And so it shows the DNS server there. Now the DNS server, incidentally, is actually using IPv6, but we can set that information if we needed to. But it's using the correct one. Okay, so getnet IP address shows me the IP address. BCD edit would show with the enum command would show the startup environment for Nano. We could use the net share command, and it's going to show the shared folders, which is just the default shared folders. But if you want to make a directory, then you can make a directory on the C drive, corp data. Once that directory is made, we can use the new SMB share command. And this is just simple sharing, but I'm just going to call it corp data. And then the path for that would be the C corp data folder. Okay, so we can quickly create a share. Now if I go get net share or get SMB share would be the PowerShell way of doing that. We see that in addition to the default shares, I now have that corp data share. It was shared with the default access rights of everyone just getting read permissions. And we'll go through some of that later. But that's going to complete this demonstration. In the demonstration, we took a look at the process of joining the Nano server to the domain and really completing the configuration of that server by adding a role to the server. All right, so as I said, we've used PowerShell almost entirely. We could also use Server Manager, and we can make connections to that system via Server Manager, but we'll just take a look at that in an upcoming demonstration.